Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Food, Wine, and Travel Show, where we go across country and travel the world with members of the International Food, Wine, Travel Writers Association. Let's go. Welcome, everyone. Rose Palmer is back on the show today. Rose is an award-winning travel writer and photographer. We love her photos. She just came back from Iceland on a cruise with Iceland ProCruises, which is an, all Icelandic company, which I think is great. If you're going to travel somewhere, go with the locals. And she did. She's been all over on our shows. Every year she comes on with IFTWA, International Food, Wine, Travel Writers Association. And today she's going to talk about Iceland. But Nancy and I have been drooling over her photos, enjoyed her story. The links for all of that are in the show notes, so you can read it online. Also will be an upcoming Big Blend magazine. But also go to her website, quiltripping.com. Did I do that right? It's Quill?
Yes, quilt tripping. So, yes, quilt tripping.
One T.
One T, two Ps, quilttripping.com, because life is a patchwork of experiences.
See, and welcome back, by the way.
Thank you for having me. We
love having you on the shows. We love your stories and photography and those puffins. I know we're going to talk about the cruise, but can we bring up the puffins? We haven't seen them for years. The last time was over 20 something years when we were in the Channel Islands, on the, England, France side, not California. And I just flipped out, man, that they are just the coolest birds. Was that your first time, or have you seen them before?
No, this was my first time, and I was really looking forward to it. When my husband and I had been to Iceland before, but we were there in September, so they had long gone by then. So with this cruise, I was really, really looking forward to seeing the puffins because it was in August. And it was the highlight one of the highlights of the cruise for me. And the reason it was one of the biggest highlights is because Iceland ProCruises took us to a tiny little island that only they have access to. It's an island, basically a private type of island that's used for vacation homes by the local Icelanders. And they are the only ones that have an inn with the people that live there and are allowed to bring their guests on shore. And the island is just covered, the cliffs, with the puffin nest. And because it's not an overcrowded touristy spot, they're content to hang out while we stand there and watch them. So I was able to get fairly close. Even though I was close, I still had to use my big telephoto lens to get as close as I did to the photos that you're showing. But just watching them, they're just so adorable. You can't help it. I just wanted to stay and watch them all day.
But those are some iconic shots you got. I mean, the one just sitting with the fish hanging out of its mouth. And I'm like, dude, those are the photos that we always look at going,
exactly.
I want to go just for that,
Exactly.
And I want to talk to them. I do.
Yeah,
I'm weird that way. They remind me of and maybe they are related, like toucans crossed with a hornbill,
Yeah, I don't know. They do look a little bit like that. And I saw a bunch of puffins with fish in their mouth, and it was never just one. It was always a handful. It's like, okay, I am going to be prepared for, in case I get really, really hungry, and I'm going to bring up 5 fish and hold them in my mouth. And he was just holding them and looking at me and kind of giving me this look like, no, I'm not sharing. You can't have these.
Yeah, you're on a cruise ship, and I know you're having really good food. So, you have yours and I'll have mine,
Exactly.
but little piggies.
Exactly.
But I think that's what's so neat, going with these kind of cruises. And this was a small cruise.
It was.
But it was a cruise where the ship was more of an expedition ship. So it's not like.
It is. Exactly. It was an expedition ship. It's called the MSC Venture, and it was built for polar exploration. So in the wintertime, it's down in Antarctica, as a matter of fact, with a different company that charters it for the winter months down in Antarctica. But in the summer months, it's up there around Iceland and Greenland with Iceland ProCruises. This was the first year that they chartered the MSC Venture. and it was wonderful. It was only 100 passengers. It's designed with 82 cabins, so about 160 passengers max. All the cabins are the same size. They're quite roomy. They all have either a window or a porthole, and a few of them with balconies. And then they also have two suites, which are a little bit larger and are actually perfect for families. We actually had a family on board with two young girls who were staying in the suite. Um, so it's a totally different experience. It was my first time on this type of a ship, a smaller ship, and yet the the public spaces were, I didn't feel like they were small. I was very surprised at how many public spaces there were, how big they were. The hanging out lounge, the sea breeze lounge was, there was enough room there for all the passengers. It's where we would hang out in the evenings after dinner, or maybe before dinner after we got back from an excursion. That's where the bar was. The bartenders obviously were always, there and happy to provide drinks and, whatever you wanted, whether it was alcoholic or non-alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the top of the ship, on the seventh deck forward at the very front was kind of the big lecture type um, public space. I don't want to call it a hall. It was really another hangout spot, but that's where we would have our daily talks, informational talks, and then there, you could hang out
Mm-hmm.
there and just watch the scenery from inside if you didn't want to be outside. Because Iceland, even in August, was in the 60s,
Oh.
during the day. So,
Mm.
and you're on a ship, and if the ship is moving, and it's going to be windy, so it could be a little bit chilly out. If you didn't want to sit outside, you
Yeah.
could sit in there and see the scenery. And then the other big surprise for me was the dining room. I mean, I was kind of expecting, when I think of expedition ships, I think of kind of explorers, kind of just basic necessities. But this was not basic. This was quite comfortable and I would even say like luxurious. The dining room was big. It was beautiful. It was set with linens and fine china and nice glasses,
Wow.
and then the food was fantastic.
So I mean, it's not like a teeny ship, right? But
No,
it just looks spacious, but not oversized. And,
right.
and I was looking at your photos. You ate fermented shark. It's
So,
not like lutefisk, is it?
I don't know. I haven't. So it's fermented shark is Iceland's traditional food. It's a delicacy for them. They apparently love it. And the reason they ferment the shark, I actually wrote a story for it on the IFTWA magazine website. But the reason they have to ferment the shark is it's a Greenland shark, and in order for the shark to survive in the cold depths of the Arctic waters, it kind of makes a type of chemical in its body it would degrade into ammonia. So it's not something that you can't eat the shark just as is. It would make you very ill. Somewhere back in the ancient history of Icelandic culture, they figured out that if they took the shark meat and just kind of let it sit in its own juices for 3 or 4 months and let it kind of ferment, um, those chemicals that act like um, to protect the shark in the cold waters, they break down into ammonia, which then gets released, and then that makes the shark
Oh,
somewhat edible. And then they take this meat and then they hang it up to dry for about another 6 months. And then that makes it really safe to eat and makes it this very white, flaky meat, which after you bite into it and chew it for a couple of bites, still has a little bit of an ammonia flavor. And then you wash it down with the local Icelandic brew that they've
okay. I'm in.
distilled.
I'm in on the Icelandic beer. You got me on beer. The
No,
shark.
not beer. This we're talking hard liquor. Um,
Oh,
so it's kind of like their version of vodka. But it's yeah, we're talking strong fermented alcohol. So you wash it down with that, and then some local dark bread.
okay.
And
Well,
I mean,
okay. So you've got fermented shark, fermented, whatever they're doing for the vodka. So there's fermenting going on basically, which is,
yeah.
and that bread, isn't that bread kind of famous also for like, I know they have like, where they bake it in the geothermal thingies or something, like out in the hot springs or something in
Mhm.
Iceland somewhere. Not every
I did
loaf,
not
obviously.
experience that, but yes,
Yeah.
I've seen some photos of that, but did not get to experience that this time.
Mm.
But yeah, the food was fantastic. So Iceland Pro Cruises brings a an Icelandic chef on board, along with all the other staff that's on the ship in the kitchen, and
That's
so
awesome.
he makes sure that we get a chance to experience local dishes, and every night there was a freshly caught different type of local fish on the menu
Oh,
for
wow.
dinner. And they would have it, the fish kind of sitting out there, um, cold, so that you can see what it looks like, and then they would also show you, well, what the actual dish would look
Mm.
like. So when we first walked into the dining room, there was a table set with samples of all the different items on the menu.
That's
So you
cool,
could,
man. I
yeah,
love that
yeah,
because that's what I've seen from these kind of cruises that they're so informative and that you have like programs so you know what you're looking at. You really it enhances the experience to get an understanding and I love that it's local and the people on the ship, the company itself is local, so they know
it is.
they know themselves, but
Exactly. Exactly. That
so
was
this was this 10 days going around the island, right?
it
10
was
days.
yeah, right, right. So from day one when we left Reykjavik until we landed back in Reykjavik, it was a 10-day from beginning to end, and we went all the way around the island, stopped at different ports along the coast, and then we had excursions, that kind of went in to see the different sites
Hmm.
from each port.
Waterfalls being one of them. Like,
Lots of
well,
water. Well, I mean, Iceland is its middle name is waterfalls. It's there's probably a waterfall about every 10 feet of various varying sizes. They have waterfalls that here in the States would have its own little state park around it, and there it's just kind of another little ho hum waterfall. Um, but lots
wow.
of waterfalls, and lots of the big name waterfalls, that that are part of their offerings for their excursions. So yeah, you get a really good, I think I got a really good introduction and sampling of the beautiful scenery in Iceland on the trip.
That's awesome. Seeing the scenery, then, obviously having the food. And by the way, that one dessert photo too. And I'm like, dude, they're like attention to detail seems to be the
Oh
thing.
yes. And I
You
only
know,
sent you one photo of the desserts. I could have sent you 10.
well, you had a happy 10 days. Let's put it that way. But food,
It
when
was.
you have weather like that too, food is like, oh, give me the food. There's something, it's, because you go out, right? It's going to have that little bit of bristle in it, which is invigorating.
Yes.
That weather is invigorating. Nancy and I are babies about anything cold, but we've done it. Listen, I've done, no, yeah, yeah, yeah. I've done my share of snow now a lot. And
Okay.
yeah, yeah, no. But
Well,
there's an invigorating quality to it that, you know, you can't just ignore it and sit inside and never go out. You have to go out and see the waterfall. You've got to get out and see the puffins.
great.
But when you come back in, man, you feel like, yeah, that was awesome. But you may not want to be out there for the whole time in the cold. you know.
And I'm a little bit the opposite. I don't like super cold, but I don't really like the heat and humidity in August. So I was thrilled to be able to go a little further north and not be hot and sweaty. And I mean, to me, 50s and 60s isn't too bad.
Mm.
Um, I just
This is
layer
so
up. Yeah.
funny about your experiences. I mean, last year, well, yeah, last year you were on talking about going, on the Mekong River. I mean,
Right.
you're in Southeast Asia and,
Yeah.
going to Cambodia and like talk about this is like a
Yeah.
night and day experience. Like you go like polar opposites here. I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, do you have like a map on your wall of like, putting thumbtacks in of where you've been, or do you just keep, I mean, I know being a photographer and a writer, you have it all, but do you feel like, yeah, do you have like a list of where you must go, where you want to go? And does it go according to what you want to write about?
A little bit of everything. So I do have a spreadsheet, so I come from a science background, so that I can't get rid of that. And so I do have some spreadsheets. I do have a spreadsheet with the list of, all the 195, however many they are, UN countries. And I've got highlighted the ones that I'm interested in seeing. I don't want to see all of them. There's some places that I honestly don't necessarily want to go to. But I'm really to me, it's about the experiences. It isn't necessarily just the location. It's about having unique experiences, and part of that is experiencing the culture, experiencing the scenery, and photography. For me, photography is a huge part of my travels. I can't travel and not take pictures. It just, if you tied my hands behind my back if I'm somewhere that's beautiful scenery, I would be miserable if I couldn't take a photo of it and try and capture that beauty and the sense that I feel for it in somehow through my photos. And that's why I've become a travel writer and blogger, is so that I can share all of that information. And because the
Hmm.
world's a huge place, and it's a wonderful place. There are so many unique things to see and do, and people are in many ways they're not that different. The culture might be different, but as a person around the world, we're not different, and I'd like finding that out.
I love that. I love that you're getting that because you get the history too. You tend to get into
Yes,
a little bit of
yes,
history as well,
yes.
you know. Um, yeah. Uh, I just I think it's cool that you're going to these epic places and they're bucket list adventures and that you go on these different kind of cruises. I mean, this again is two different things, but you're,
Yeah,
going around the island. And we were talking about this before we started recording about how cool it is to just kind of not have to be in the driver's seat, and have those
exactly.
adventures where like, Nancy and I do our crazy, weird road trips that no one has to understand, but that's who we are. But you're going, but then I'm going, I don't know. I think I'll have to come to your side at some point because just to not have to, you have to diffuse, you have
Right.
to let go. And to me, this is a way of doing it. Just letting go, you know?
And I love all forms of travel, and I do the road trips as well. So, my husband and I just came back from 6 weeks and driving around New Zealand, where we did it all on our own. But
Wow,
then
that's cool.
on the flip side, with like with this cruise with Iceland ProCruises, like you said, they do the travel, they do all the work. They have a choice of excursions at each port, and I just picked the one that I wanted to do. And I only had to unpack once, and then when I got back on the ship, the food was there, the bed was made. I didn't have to worry about it. So I like, I like doing both. There doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both types of experiences. And what I really
Mm,
liked about this particular cruise and experience is, as you mentioned, Iceland ProCruises is Icelandic owned. So the two owners, one is from Iceland, one is from, I believe, if I remember right, Liechtenstein, or maybe, yeah. And the whole, and then their parent company is Icelandic, and all their guides are Icelandic. So they are very much invested in the local culture and the
mm,
local economy. And, when they're telling you a story, it's from their own experience. It's from their own, when they're telling you a story about a legend or a myth, this is something that they grew up with,
mm,
and that it's part of who they are. So you're getting a really, I felt like I was getting a very authentic perspective of the culture and the people of Iceland as well, which sometimes what I find is when I'm traveling on my own and just driving around is a little bit harder to do unless you're actually, you book a tour.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
and
tours are great.
here I was getting it, every day. Besides the formal lectures where they would talk about the flora or the fauna or the history
Mm,
or the language, which, Icelandic language is very unique. We would get, just on the Zodiac as as we would be going from the boat to the port to get off. They would talk about the birds that we were seeing or the geology, or somebody would ask a
that's
question
so
about
cool.
something. And, so it was just always a very authentic Icelandic perspective, which was definitely, I think, one of the biggest attractions for me for this cruise.
Well, I think it's really neat that you're, being able to get off the boat every time, right? Every day, right?
Right.
You
Oh
had a
yeah, a
different
couple times.
excursion.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, these
So
excursions, and you get out on a Zodiac, which to me would be like, uh-oh. But it looked like you sent photos of that too, so people can see it
yeah.
actually looks like it really it's not bad. But there was
No. No.
what and fun, right? To be able to get on the Zodiacs and get
Yeah. Yeah.
to your destination instead of them, which is, I think, also another step of being a little bit more on the sustainable thing too, of
Right.
making it easier it's just a good way of making it work for the place, for the boat, for the people.
Yep.
But there was one that you had a walkway and then it looked like a hot spring. Like what was going on there? It was, and you saw whales. We need to talk about that. The
Right.
thermal baths. Tell me about the
Oh,
thermal
well,
baths.
so Iceland is I mean I think I want to go to Iceland and spend a month there just
Oh,
to try out the different hot spring baths that they have. I mean, that is just another big part of their culture. Is because they have all this volcanic activity and all of these hot thermal features in the country, they've tapped into that, and every community has its own little local swimming pool, if you want to call it, hot tub
mhm.
combination with these baths of different, different temperatures. And, the family will go there for a couple of hours and hang out with the little kids or whatever. I did that when I was in Husavik. I went into the local community hot pool. So everybody knows about the Blue Lagoon outside of Reykjavik, which is beautiful. If you go to Iceland, you have to do that once, but it's for tourists, and everybody will tell you
Mhm.
it's for tourists. But it's gorgeous. But to get the true Icelandic hot spring activity or swimming experience, you need to just go into one of the community pools and just hang out. And so the picture I sent you was one of the ones that we went to as part of an excursion. And what they did is they actually built these pools into the edge of a lake. So you
Wow.
could, you could sit in the hot pool, and then if you get a little too hot, or if you want to, you kind of do a polar plunge into the lake, which is significantly colder. I did not do that. I stuck my toe in, and that was about as much as I wanted to do. The hot water was much better, but
What?
people were doing it, and then we go back into the hot water, and there was our group of tourists there, but the majority of the people hanging out were the locals, and
Oh,
it
wow.
was a brand new facility, beautiful, high tech. They give you this little wristband with a little digital thing in it, which you use to get in and then to open up your locker, and then also at the end to get out, and then to charge any drinks that you want. I mean, just yeah, amazing. Yeah.
Wow. And you also went to like there's the islands, but then there's like other little places like Grimsey, which there was the Arctic Circle
Right.
marker there.
So it's Iceland itself is not on the Arctic Circle. It's close. And the island of Grimsey, which is one of the number of islands that are part of Iceland, is on the Arctic Circle. And so the boat, because our ship, I should call it a ship, it's not a boat, because it's small enough, we were able to get close to it, and then we took the Zodiacs into the harbor and to get out and walked around the island. It's not a very big island. I think all of like 60 people live there. But there's a marker where the Arctic Circle sits, and they have sent you the picture. They have a couple of benches that have the marker with the North Pole longitude and latitude, and then there's also like a big um, huge pole with different signs on it saying pointing towards different parts of the world. But yeah, it's so that was another one of the unique experiences that we did
Mm.
with with Iceland
Yeah.
Pro Cruises. And then I forget if it was that day or the next day, as we were cruising around to get from the north side, which is where Grimsey is, towards heading east towards the eastern side of the island. We the captain took the ship specifically past the Arctic Circle again, and so we got to to see the sun setting as we're crossing the Arctic Circle, and we had an Arctic Circle party up on deck with special with all sorts of Icelandic foods and more fermented shark and more of the local drink.
More fermentation,
More
basically, and desserts.
and lots of good food and lots of good desserts as we cruised past the Arctic Circle. Right, right.
Did you hear any like music from like local style music while you were there at all? I mean, maybe we have to go in the cities a little bit
So
more.
here's one of the other really unique aspects. One of the guides is actually a trained opera singer.
No
Uh,
way.
and in her previous career, she performed opera and in Iceland and in Europe, and has records and all of that. And that career just got a little bit too intense for her, so she is now a guide. Has been doing it for quite a number of years with Iceland Pro Cruises. And so one evening, as part of the entertainment after dinner, in the main lounge, they have a baby grand piano. Um, she sang some of the traditional folk songs for us in
That's
Icelandic.
cool.
Yeah, that was a really neat experience. Again, another example of um, some of the unique things you get when you get local guides. And the other
Mm.
thing I want to mention, which I don't think I put into my story, but Iceland Pro Cruises also markets to the German market, and so we had quite a few German speaking. About half the guests on board were German speaking, and then the other half were English speaking. And every single guide was spoke German fluently, spoke English fluently, and obviously Icelandic. And they were
Wow.
switching between the three languages. So I grew up speaking German, and I still understand it. So when they were doing their commentary in German, I could understand it. And then they would do it in English. And they weren't like just, translating from English into German or German into English.
Yeah.
They were doing a, real idiomatic, correct
Wow.
language, narration in all three languages. It was just fascinating
Man, so
to listen
when
to
you say
them.
the word pro, they really this is top notch, top notch.
Oh
That's
yeah, yeah.
hospitality to the key. I
It
mean,
is. It
that
is.
is incredible. And then I before you go on this, I want to ask you about the whales.
Yes.
That whale sighting, was that on the actual,
So
boat
that no, that was
or on a Zodiac?
that was one of the excursions in Husavik, which is on the northern coast of Iceland and is known for being the best place to see whales in Iceland. And it was on a kind of like a Zodiac, but it wasn't the ship Zodiac. It was on a what they call a rigid inflatable boat, and it was an excursion, and they outfit you in these big warm uh jumpers, jumpsuits type things, and you go out there and they go searching for the whales. And because it's a small boat and it's more, has more flexibility in moving around, we were able to get very close to the whales. I mean, obviously they have to maintain a certain distance. Um, but if we were standing in place, and if the whale chooses to come closer to you, that's okay. But we were able to have the flexibility to follow the whales a lot more easily than the kind of the bigger traditional boats do. And I have to say, this was one of the best whale watching experiences I've ever had. And I've done a few of them because I'm still searching for that perfect whale breaching photo, which I don't
Hmm.
have. I have a lot of pictures of whale's tails,
Yeah.
and whale's tails are beautiful, and it's great to see them. But I'm still trying to get that breaching whale. But this time, we were able to see them. The humpbacks came up and were feeding, and their whole head came up, and so we were also, I've got some photos of their huge heads and their mouths, which I wasn't able to get before. Yeah,
That's
that was a
amazing.
yeah, that was a
That's
really,
amazing.
really cool experience.
Yeah, I think, it's magnificence, right? And,
It
it's
is. Oh my gosh, yeah. Talk about feeling small when you've got a whale's tail coming up about 15 feet away from your little rigid inflatable boat. Yeah.
yeah, no, no, I think so. It just, yeah, I always think about when kayakers are out with the whales. You see those photos
Right.
of a kayaker,
Right.
like
Oh yeah.
a whale's
Yeah.
under them, and I'm like, dude. But then, like, I'm weird. I'm like that with alligators and stuff too. So it's kind of like, I don't know, we play around in swamps and stuff, and it's like, okay, that's cool. It's like, oh, look, there's a cottonmouth, and he's going to strike me if I don't back off and use a telephoto lens at this point, you know? So, and then it's like, dude, that was so cool. It was epic, because I think we get fearful of, the outdoors, and you should have a healthy dose of fear and not be one of those, the typical tourist who goes with, I'm going to get an Instagram with the bison,
Oh no, no, no.
no,
Don't do that. Don't do that.
you know what I mean, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
we need to not be, you know, like that. And so
No.
that's the other thing I think about these kinds of, um, cruises where, you're getting this education. So maybe you get insight to, oh, I'm not going to be like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's kind of,
Yes.
and I think there's something that they're doing to, obviously it's Iceland's not, you've got to protect it. Like what you were talking about, you were all over New Zealand. I know New Zealand's working very hard to be sustainable, right? So,
Hmm.
in your travels, are you seeing that these, kind of changes of like, okay, let's dial it back, but create a bigger, like a more, you can have a more intimate experience, but not like with busloads of people. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and Iceland is ideal for that because their country's population is something like just barely around 300,000, maybe just a little bit more than that. So, um, even when you go there, you don't see big cities. You don't, you'll see little towns and villages. Um, and even Reykjavik, for a big city, I don't remember really seeing huge skyscrapers. It feels very, very organic. As I was, both on this cruise and then when I was driving around it with my husband when we toured it. It seems like it's nothing but beautiful scenery with an occasional, town or village here and there, or a couple of guest houses where you can stay at and eat at. And then the rest of it, you're just driving and you're looking at beautiful, pristine, unspoiled scenery. And you're right, seems like it's so hard to find.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes Iceland such a popular destination because it is unspoiled and because I think they do work very hard to maintain that. They are fortunate in that they have all this geothermal energy, and so they can use that to heat their homes, not just their hot pools, but also their homes, greenhouses. So one of the really cool things I did when I was touring on my own is we went to eat in a restaurant that was inside a greenhouse where they were growing tomatoes all year.
Oh, cool.
Um,
Wow.
so they definitely, I think you're right. They definitely have a philosophy of sustainability because they
Mm.
have the resources, I think,
Yeah.
to make
Yeah.
it easier, when it's a country that's not overpopulated, when they, when you can easily heat your home and, provide the food either through growing it or through fishing for it,
Hmm.
or, you know, through sheep, having, meat in that, or even some
Hmm.
cattle. Um, I think it's much easier to have kind of a perspective of being sustainable and
I have a friend who's a world
priority.
traveler, and I think he's done over 140, 150 countries, probably he's way up there in countries. And he said he had the best hamburger in the world in Iceland, the best,
I believe it. Yeah, the food
but
was
the most
fantastic.
expensive that he's
That
had too.
too. Yeah, no, it's everywhere. I went in Iceland, both on this cruise and on my own. Um, I did not have a bad meal. It was all so delicious. And I think because of the emphasis on fresh food,
Mm.
nothing processed, local, um, and freshly prepared,
Yeah, and
So,
their topsoil hasn't been ruined, right? So it's like how France, we you talk about south of France, the food there being so fresh and so
mhm,
their soil so good. Um, but you've got to think like Iceland, though. I every time I see photos of Iceland and look at Iceland, I just feel like it's true fresh air. I don't know how to
yeah,
explain it,
yep,
but
yep,
it just looks like fresh air to me, which I think feeds your body. Having fresh, clean, fresh air is a massive thing. It is so
right,
important for our
exactly.
bodies.
Yeah.
So I bet you it transfers into the food,
Oh,
what
I'm
you're
sure,
eating.
yeah. I think, yeah, I'm sure it does. It's not the country's, it's unspoiled. The waters around it are unspoiled. So one of the excursions that we did was to a herring museum, and that was really fascinating because it talked about the history, especially of the women and the role that the women played in the herring industry back in the early part of the 20th century. Um, but also, it really talked about how they overfished. They relied so much on the money coming in from herring fishing that it ended up that they overfished the waters around Iceland, um, and then it crashed. And so now they've learned how to fish without overfishing, and there's controls in place between Iceland and other countries that do this kind of fishing. Um,
Mm.
but they have such a wealth of seafood around their island. It's not just herring, but and they take advantage of it. But at the same time, they've learned the lessons from their history on how to do it, like you said, sustainably. And then
Mm.
they use these fresh resources and put it on the table.
Ah, I love this. I love this. Everyone, Iceland ProCruises.com is a website for this company. And again, the link for the article and photos Rose has written is in the show notes too. But I wanted to ask you, Rose, the International Food Wine Travel Writers Association, hey,
Yes,
they had a cruise last year for their conference, which
they
I think is
did.
pretty cool. They did.
It was.
Um,
It was great.
this year it's going to be upstate New York. I mean, we're talking good wine and good food too. We're talking
Oh,
this,
yes.
that's going to be magic. Have you been to any of their conferences yet?
So that was my first one. The one on the Discovery Princess
Oh, cool.
was my first conference with IFTWA. And it was great venue. I mean, I love Princess Cruises. That was my sixth or seventh in the last year and a half with Princess. So, and
Wow.
it was their newest ship to date. They've got a new one coming out, Sun Princess here. I think their inaugural cruise is going to be at the end of February in the Mediterranean. But yeah, it was a great venue, nice conference. And then the Finger Lakes region. I mean, I've been there. It's not far from where I live, and you can't go wrong with visiting the Finger Lakes for some great, nice Riesling
Yeah.
wines from the U.S. Can't beat it.
Yeah. I think they're doing great on these cruises and keeping up with their programs for writers and destinations to connect even online in the webinars, the networking, as just onward and upward. So it's fantastic with the organization. I think it's so cool. And we get to hear about your adventures. And it's one thing I love to do is follow IFTWA, we say IFTWA for the International Food Wine Travel Writers Association. You can go to ifwtwa.org, but also use that as a hashtag on social media because you will see stories from writers all over. I mean, it's like a nice little vacation just to take time out. I do it in between meetings, and then I'm like, oh, I have to go to a meeting. I'm busy going around the world, so it's a really good way to plan trips, and places that we may not have heard of, and organizations and companies. And I love that you're doing small cruises. I think it's so good and healthy. And I just, I appreciate the story so much and that you got to play with puffins. Oh,
Oh,
I love
yes.
that puffin photo.
They
I'm
are they
just
are
saying.
adorable.
Mm,
Yes, it
I
was
love
one of
it.
the highlights.
Yeah, I just feel like they need to talk to us like a cartoon bird. They do. But anyway, everyone, quilttripping.com is a website for Rose Palmer. You keep up with her there. Again, all links are in the show notes, and we appreciate everyone joining us. Thank you so much, Rose, and happy travels in
Thank you.
2024.
Thank you. Until next time. Appreciate your
Absolutely.
talking to me.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio's Food, Wine, and Travel Show featuring members of the International Food, Wine, Travel Writers Association. We encourage you to visit their website. We say IFTWA, which is ifwtwa.org. You can also follow us at bigblendradio.com. Happy travels, everyone!